from Alaska.
Mr. President, I ask consent to be able to use a prop on the Senate floor, a tree spike.
Without objection.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, you see some of my colleagues are down here. We're a little bit fired up, right? And this is not some kind of partisan game. We are fired up for a reason that the U.S. Senate is getting ready to confirm a nominee who has no business being even considered on the Senate floor. No business being considered on the Senate floor. And with all due respect to my colleague from Montana, this isn't, what did he say, attacks against somebody. These are facts that we're going to talk about. These are facts. Someone who is still continuing to not even tell the truth about her past as a violent eco-terrorist. Now, look, we know this administration is putting forward far-left individuals. I'm going to talk about a few. But to put forward a far-left violent nominee, I think we all should recognize is kind of a bridge too far for the United States Senate. But that's happening right now, and I'm really hopeful that at least some of my Democratic colleagues at the last minute will go, maybe we shouldn't do this. Maybe we shouldn't set this standard. So I've been on the floor a number of times talking about Tracy Stone-Manning's nomination. It's actually the first time in my Senate career that I asked the president to withdraw a nominee, and for good reasons. Because of all the things you've heard from my colleague from Wyoming, Idaho, colleagues from mostly Western states. And I am going to ask my Democratic colleagues from Western states, do you really want to set this precedent? How are you going to go home and tell people who harvest timber legally for a living that you are good to go with this? Good to go with someone who put hundreds of these kind of tree spikes in trees for people, our fellow Americans, to get hurt. But that's what we're seeing right here. You know, I think that maybe the Biden administration, after I and many others requested that they withdraw this nominee, that maybe they thought, well, look, with all the noise going on around here, a reckless $3.5 trillion tax and spend extravaganza, the botched Afghanistan withdrawal, the crisis on the southern border, inflation going through the roof, the price at the pump hurting working families in my state and those across America, the shutdown of the energy sector unilaterally, and then going begging Russia and Iran for more oil that they can import to the United States. I mean, you can't make this stuff up. But I think the Biden administration thought, with all this chaos that they're creating, maybe nobody will notice Tracy Stone-Manning's confirmation process and vote. Well, they're wrong. As you see here, there's some really strong feelings about this nominee. A past eco-terrorist, a member of Earth First, an extreme group that performed violent acts as part of their platform for getting attention in America. In fact, she's so extreme that the director of BLM from the Obama-Biden administration, Bob Abbey, made a statement saying that if her violent eco-terrorist past activities were true, and they were, I'm going to talk about them. Senator Risch has already talked about them. Senator Barrasso has. Senator Lummis has. If these were true, then President Obama's BLM director said she does not deserve the job. So this isn't just Republicans. This is the former Democrat director of the agency that we're going to vote on that she wants to lead. So before I talk a little bit more about her, and I know we've had a number of senators do it, I want to make another point. The reason I've been down here so much focused on this nominee is that BLM, to some states, heck, if you live in Connecticut, probably nobody knows what that is. But the Bureau of Land Management in my state is one of the most powerful federal agencies there is. in the great state of Alaska. Mr. President, the Alaska BLM manages more surface and subsurface acres in my state than in any other state in the country by far. The BLM director in Alaska is our landlord, and I don't want an eco-terrorist as my state's landlord. And neither do my constituents. Let me give you some numbers. The BLM manager in Alaska manages over 70 million surface acres of land and 220 million subsurface acres of land in Alaska. Little context, that is the equivalent land of about 1/5 of the entire lower 48. You see why this is really important to me and my constituents. Most states can't even comprehend land that size. 1/5 of the lower 48 of the United States of America is about the amount of land BLM manages just in my state. This is a huge amount of land, and of course, by definition, a huge amount of power that this federal agency has over the people I am privileged to represent. Their work, their jobs, their hunting activities, their subsistence activities, and that's why I've been down here talking about this nominee. I know to some East Coast states, forget it, we don't know who she is, no power. She doesn't have any power over New Jersey or some of these other small states on the East Coast, but in my state, massive power. And it is imperative that the director of this agency, the Bureau of Land Management, with so much power and so much control over the future of Alaska and its economic opportunity for working families, that the manager of BLM be trustworthy, be honest, be fair-minded, beyond reproach, and certainly not someone who was involved in eco-terrorism earlier in their career. Is that too much to ask, my colleagues in the Senate? And what we know about Tracy Stone-Manning is she is none of these things. She hasn't been trustworthy with the Senate, fair-minded. But let's go back to a little bit of her background, because people need to know this. People need to know this. And my colleagues have already done a good job, but I hope the American people are watching this. She was not only a member of Earth First, a radical far-left group that has engaged repeatedly in what's defined as eco-terrorism, she herself was complicit in putting metal spikes, see this? Big, thick metal spikes by the hundreds in trees that were meant either to hurt or gravely injure American citizens who were legally harvesting trees. We're okay with that? Senate Democrats? We're okay with that? Americans who were cutting down trees legally as part of their job to help their economy, to help their family, who were putting trees in sawmills legally. All the while, she and her buddies, comrades I call them, were acting illegally, putting these spikes by the hundreds in trees. This was a common technique, tree spiking, as it was called, developed by eco-terrorists in the late 1980s and early 90s. Now, Miss Manning's group, Earth First, began in the 1980s by disaffected environmentalists who thought their movement wasn't radical enough. So, how can we get more attention? Let's perpetrate violence against our fellow Americans. That's how they thought they could get more attention. Their slogan was no compromise in defense of Mother Earth. And in their view, no compromise meant destroying property, putting steel spikes in trees that could kill someone who harvested a tree. And they celebrated and even encouraged such actions. The group even put out a manual detailing tree spiking and instructions on how to do other sabotage activities, cutting down power lines, flattening tires, burning machinery, all directed at those who are trying to legally harvest trees. David Foreman, the founder of Earth First, described all these activities as fun. This is where you can have fun. So let me talk a little bit about fun. I have an article, Mr. President, from the Washington Post during that time. They were talking about a tree spiking incident, and I'm going to quote from it. George Alexander, a third-generation mill worker, was just starting his shift at the Louisiana Pacific Lumber Mill in Cloverdale, California, when the log that would alter his life rolled down his conveyor belt toward a high-speed saw. Now, we have some of these saws in these mills in Alaska, not nearly as many as we used to have. They are huge. They're giant. They're the size of people. They spin at incredibly fast speeds, huge teeth. They are dangerous to work normally. But when you put a steel spike in a tree that's going through a fastly spinning saw, you can imagine the explosion and the violence. I'll continue the article. It was May 1987, and Alexander was 23 years old. His job was to split logs. He was nearly 3 feet away when the log he was working on hit his saw, and the giant saw exploded. One half of the blade struck the log, exploded when it hit one of these. The other half hit Alexander in the forehead, with the giant saw tearing through his safety helmet, tearing through his face shield. His face was slashed from eye to chin, his teeth were smashed, and his jaw was cut in half. Good job, Earth First. Fellow American, trying to kill a fellow American. So these were the kind of activities that Tracy Stone-Manning once conspired in. I wonder if that disturbs anybody. I was up at our fish camp on the Yukon River this summer, over the 4th of July, clearing some brush, trees, working a chainsaw, a smaller chainsaw, and I literally was thinking, boy, I wonder what would happen if my chainsaw hit one of these. Wouldn't have been good. So I think if you're not disturbed by this, you really should be. So I know that some of my colleagues have already read the letter on the floor that she wrote, profane, anonymous letter, from this member of Earth First about the 500 pounds of tree spikes, 500 pounds, hammered into trees in Idaho. She rewrote the letter on a rented typewriter because she later told a reporter her fingerprints were all over it, so she didn't want to be caught. So obviously she knew it was engaging in criminal activity. She didn't just handwrite it, she typed it and then sent it to the FBI. Now I know some of my colleagues have already read it. I'm just going to notice a couple highlights. This letter is being sent to notify you that the post office sale in the great state of Idaho has been spiked heavily. The project required that 11 of us spend 9 days in god-awful weather conditions spiking trees. We unloaded a total of 500 pounds of spikes, measuring 8 to 10 inches in length. 500 pounds of these. That's a lot of spikes. The majority of the trees were spiked within the first 10 feet, but many, many others were spiked as high as 100 150 feet. Again, why would they go that high? That's not where you're going to cut it down. So when it goes to a mill, you injure and kill the mill workers. She goes on further. P.S. Mr. Chairman, I don't know if I'm allowed to swear, but you can call me out if I'm not supposed to. P.S. You bastards go in there anyway, and a lot of people could get hurt. That's real nice. Now, she kept quiet for many years on what she did. She later received immunity for her part in this tree spiking when prosecutors went after other members of Earth First, and she testified about it. But in her narrative, she's always tried to portray herself as a victim. She wasn't a victim. The investigator of this disputes that characterization dramatically. The U.S. Special Forest Service Special Agent Michael Merkley describes her as vulgar, antagonistic, extremely anti-government. She was uncooperative. It was also clear that only after she knew she was going to get in trouble that she began to cooperate. Let me be clear, Special Agent Merkley said recently, Ms. Stone-Manning only came forward after her attorney struck the immunity deal and not before she was caught. In testimony to the Senate, she claimed that tree spiking was alleged. It wasn't alleged, and it was never investigated. That's not true. We know that's not true. So that was recent. So it's not just the tree spiking. She hasn't been honest, but she's still clearly a radical. Let me give you another example. Her husband wrote an article from Harper's Magazine. Senator Risch already talked about this in 2018, claiming wildfires were a political issue, that such an issue should be solved by letting houses in forests burn. Think about that. Perhaps the solution to houses in the interface is to let them burn. Those are his exact words. Now, look, that's her husband. Can't blame her for her husband's radical views. But here's what she did. She weighed in herself in 2020, last year, retweeting the article and basically endorsing these views. Here's what she said. Not a bad time to revisit this piece from my husband, Richard Manning, from 2 years ago. Clarion call on climate action. So think about that, Mr. President. So I was in charge of our lands in Alaska. We worked, including fighting wildfires. We worked really closely with the federal government, state of Alaska, federal officials on fighting our wildfires. We have big wildfires in Alaska. Always have had them, always will have them. Never, ever, ever, in any time I was involved in issues related to fighting wildfires, have I heard a state official or federal official say, hey, if there's a fire near a bunch of homes, let them burn. But do you see the problem? She's going to be in charge of that in Alaska. Let them burn. You know what our federal firefighters do? They save structures. They save houses. They're very heroic. Let them burn, she said last year. In a nutshell, Mr. President, this is potentially, if we don't stop this vote tonight, the new head of the BLM. She was a member of an eco-terrorist group who had a goal to actually threaten to hurt or actually hurt American citizens, hardworking Americans doing something legal. She's clearly been dishonest recently. With all due respect to my colleague from Montana, these aren't some kind of ad hominem attacks. These are facts. Last year, she said, hey, I agree with my husband's article. Let it burn. Let the homes burn in these wildfires. That's not going to work in my state. She's going to head up an agency with enormous power over my state and its future. So look, we have differences on issues of resource development, energy for America, certainly on issues of jobs. In my state, unfortunately, the Biden administration seems to weekly want to shut down resource development. Just in Alaska, I think we're up to almost 20 executive orders or related actions from this administration focused just on my state to shut down jobs. I gave a speech here a while ago asking not the President of the Senate, the President of the United States, could you imagine if a Republican administration came in and issued almost, who knows, 10, 15, it's hard to count, executive orders shutting down Delaware's economy? What would you do, Mr. President, if you were a senator? You'd be furious. Well, I'm furious. And I'm furious because we got another radical who's going to be in charge of my state's future. Let it burn. Tree spikes. But here we are, unfortunately about to confirm this individual as the director of BLM. But here's the thing I want to know, Mr. President. If you're a Western senator, say Arizona, Nevada, California, good luck going home and explaining this to your constituents. Good luck with that. Mr. President, I'm going to just mention another nominee, speak about briefly. If Tracy Stone-Manning weren't radical enough, I'd like to mention another Biden nominee from the far-left socialist fringe. This is Selah Amorova, who was nominated by the President to be comptroller of the currency. So what does the comptroller of the currency do? It charters and regulates and supervises all national banks. Another very serious position. Not a lot of Americans, highlight this or they think about it a lot. It's like BLM, but it's important, powerful. And you'd think you'd have somebody in that position who'd understand or value and respect free markets in our financial system, particularly our banks. Ms. Amorova doesn't value our system, doesn't seem to much like banks. She has other ideas, according to the Wall Street Journal today, that they said, quote, might even make our colleague Senator Sanders blush. So who is Ms. Amorova? First, she is a 1989 graduate from Moscow State University, where she received the Lenin Personal Academic Scholarship. Yeah, you heard me right. I'm not talking Moscow, Idaho. I'm talking the real Moscow in the Soviet Union. Let me say that again. A graduate, Moscow State University, where she received the Lenin Personal Academic Scholarship. You can't make this stuff up. From her writings, it appears that she still significantly believes in what she learned at old Moscow U, particularly about our free market system and communism and socialism. Here's what she tweeted in 2019, 3 years ago, 2 years ago. Until I came to the U.S., I couldn't imagine things like gender pay gap still existed in today's world. Say what you want about the old USSR, there was no gender pay gap there. Markets don't always know best. That was a tweet 2 years ago. Say what you want about the old USSR, about Stalin and Lenin and the roughly 100 million people killed during their reigns. Say what you want about the old USSR, the famine, human degradation, about the ill-fated, violent attempts to snuff out the flame of freedom and liberty all across the world. Say what you want about the old USSR, the gulags, the pogroms. At least there was no gender gap. There was no food either, by the way, and there was no freedom. So she was like, maybe I should clarify this. So here's her clarification. I never claimed women and men were treated absolutely equal in every facet of the old Soviet Union, but people's salaries were set by the state in a gender-blind manner. And all women got very generous benefits. But those things are still a pipe dream in our American society. Wow, that was her clarification. Oh, the golden days of the old USSR, a mere pipe dream now. Her nostalgia for socialist communist regimes and policies doesn't end with pay disparities. She has advocated for expanding the Federal Reserve's mandate to include draconian controls over financial institutions, wages, consumer bank deposits. How would she do this? Through, quote, a people's ledger, a national investment authority, a public interest council. Sounds like a modern-day version of the system set up by the Bolsheviks that I'm sure she learned about at Moscow U. Plainly put, she's another radical who will have sweeping powers over the institutions of our United States government. So, Mr. President, I'm going to conclude with this. If you're watching America, I hope you're seeing a theme here. The Biden administration, unfortunately with the help of some of my Senate Democratic colleagues, is trying to make us comfortable with far-left fringe radical appointments who will take over very significant posts in our government and will push us towards the path of socialism. They are pushing a radical left lurch for our country that the vast majority of Americans don't want. Just look at what my colleagues are coming up with their $3.5 trillion tax and spend bill, written by the chairman of the Budget Committee, an avowed socialist. That's not an insult, that's a fact. All of this is being done with no hearings, no markups, the biggest social spending bill in decades with zero transparency. Even the House had a markup, but the Senate, once known as the most deliberative body in the world, is not having one hearing, one markup on a $3.5 trillion reckless tax and spend bill. But mainstream middle-class America does not want socialism, and they don't want far-left radicals to run our federal government. My Democratic colleagues keep thinking they can ram through this far-left agenda without anyone noticing, but the American people are noticing. The American people are wise, and they're already starting to feel the pain of the Biden administration's far-left, anti-energy, anti-capitalism agenda, especially at the pump. They'll remember which senators are enabling this, and they'll remember the senators who have no problem voting for nominees who have a record of being part of organizations that sought to perpetrate violence against their fellow Americans. I hope my Democratic colleagues have a change of heart and vote against Tracy Stone-Manning, because our country and my state really don't need her in charge. I yield the floor.